Hey everyone, this is Mike Townsend here. This week we had Nate Stewart, the CEO of ZingCheckout, a web-based point-of-sale company based now in Austin, Texas. I actually worked with Nate in the early stages of the company, so really great to hear about his recent success and the complete redesign of Zing.co. During the conversation, it was really great. We talked a lot about the expansion of the company into other countries, his mentality on integrations with other companies, and kind of the stance and the business model positioning. But we also dug into how the company got started. How did he even find out about this problem, and how he got in to become one of the early and most advanced web-based point-of-sale companies in the world. So really a great conversation. Hope you enjoy. All right, guys, welcome today. We have Nate Stewart, the CEO and founder of ZingCheckout, myself, Brian, and Faisal on the show. Nate, welcome. How you doing today?
Good, Mike. Glad to be here.
So Nate and I worked together in the early days of Zing, which you'll hear about in a minute. Had a great time. We worked together in Los Angeles, moved the company to Austin. I later left, and we'll talk about the story of how Zing got started and where it's at now and the exciting future of the company. So Nate, with that said, you want to dive in and enlighten us of the exciting origin of the company?
Yeah. So I can kind of talk about how I got to the point. So it all came from a merchant, which I know, talking with Brian a little bit, that's really important to understand. It's not just what you want to do, but what does the consumer want? Like, is there a true problem there? And for me, I was working with a company called Red Chapter Clothing, and before Zing or ZingCheckout ever came out, I was doing e-com, lots of e-com. So I worked in e-com for about 7 years. I would custom build sites from scratch. So everything from the design of the site to the checkout process to the payment, and that involved integrating PayPal, auth.net. First data, all those things. And, I started getting good word of mouth, working with a lot of successful people, helping them build, some sites that net over $1 million a year. Started working with Red Chapter at kind of the end of that. And they had a couple of digital download sites for tattoos, and they were starting up this apparel company based off the artwork. Now they were going to events and selling what they made, the apparel items. And they went through, and I was there through the process of, okay, we need a point of sale. Let's try. It might've been Microsoft RMS and, a couple cloud-based solutions. And they went through, 10 or 11 different kinds. And they kept saying, Nate, why don't we just build it? They're all terrible. And for me, point of sale, it wasn't just a tiny jump. I knew from being in e-com, point of sale has a lot of different elements that I never had dealt with for e-com. And it's really, if anything, more mission critical, which is a little bit scary, as an entrepreneur going into that. So I was like, look, I'm not going to do it, but I can help you guys with other things. We ended up making an inventory management system that connected to their site. So they had like a little touch screen when they were first coming out in an accessible way for Windows. We built a little touch screen inventory management. So it was kind of a little stopgap. And they kept bringing up it's how terrible it was. So they were using a software called iMongo, and that was kind of the breaking point. So they used it, and it was okay. Worked on. It was web based, like ZingCheckout ended up being, but it didn't have. It had little things it didn't do well that it should have done well out of the box, like option management. So they're apparel company. They have small, medium, large, whatnot. You had to add individual items to track that. And little things like that, as a business owner, it doesn't seem a lot as a software developer, but as a business owner, it takes up so much of their time when they can't report on it correctly and all these things. So I was like, okay, guys, you bugged me enough. What's the baseline functionality you need? And, we kind of, talked about that. And in a weekend, I just hacked together a really quick, crude version of eventually what ZingCheckout would become. So they use that and for a couple months, I believe. And, we just kind of got more excited around, well, like people would come up and ask them, like, where'd they get it? They were using terminals at the time. So this is like around around when Square was coming out. So it was kind of exciting to have people, even with this crude prototype, think it was cool. And for me, I was used to developing software and just talking with the business owner, and no one else, unless it was like a direct relation to them, would come to me and want me to do anything. But people started going, this is cool. What if you add this? Or I want it on for my business. And it's just really cool to hear that. And it gets you excited on, wow, there might be a market opportunity here. And I can move from being kind of a consultant into having my own company that does this possibly. And there's a long journey when that actually happened. It took longer than I expected. But yeah, I mean, that's really where it started. And they shed iMongo, of course, and just use, at that time, I think it was called Zing Manage is what we were calling it. And we just kind of built on that iteratively. And eventually, that's Mike, that's around when I started working with you, is when it was kind of already past that beginning stage of what does it really need to do or kind of look like? And a lot of that was completed, but it's still, I mean, Red Chapter was one of the few people using it at that time, when you came on. And then from there, it was, okay, how do we get it out to a lot more businesses? And yeah, so that was kind of why it came to be, and then kind of part of why I'm here now.
All right, Nate. So where is Zing today in terms of how you think about it in traction? Is it, number of customers, revenue, size? How are you thinking about the growth of the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think of, I would say how many merchants we're helping. So it's how many people we actually touch. So there's many more than that, than if I use vanity numbers, but we're about at 10,000 merchants that have been through the platform over the past 3.5 years. The majority of them coming in the past year. So the space has kind of heated up, and we've shifted some of the pricing for how with Zing to kind of change how the merchants are using it. But we had a big influx, especially around last November, of people just kind of finding the product organically, that we're doing little shows for Christmas, or they had it for the month or two. They're like selling ornaments or any amount of things. And there's kind of just this big bump all of a sudden. And of course we've been working on getting traction before that, but I think in general, it's, ZingCheckout was a little bit early or Zing Manage or whatever happened was a little bit early to the game. And just now, all the players like, Zing and other cloud-based systems, other modern iPad point of sale, they're just now getting actually legitimate traction. Because before, traction, 2 years ago, nobody really trusted cloud enough to have their business depend on it. And
Nate,
that's changing.
I can definitely agree with that in my view also. You were definitely early. And, what really kind of fascinated me with your approach and your story, and I can see it in your product. And, we spoke earlier a number of years ago. What really blew me away is your approach was, organic. You went and looked at a scenario that presented itself. And I think this is a story of entrepreneurialism. Whenever I've seen great success, it's you sort of stumble into this thing and it's, wow, this is a good idea. Let me throw this together and let's see how it works. And you have this thing that I call a feedback loop, which seems to be missing. It's an engineering term, but seems to be missing in modern constructs of startups. They tend to have this, I'm going to build something cool to impress my friends. I'll put it out there, see if it takes hold. Instead, you sort of got there, worked with one merchant. They looked at it. They fed you back, I'm sure, endless amounts of criticisms and advice. And slowly but surely, the product grew from there. And here you are with the world catching up. And I just think it's phenomenal. It's actually opposite from what almost all of the other payment startups that have gone to POS have approached this system. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, I mean, if I would have in the beginning said, I thought it was going to be easy from the perspective of, okay, we're just going to put it on the market, and especially because Red Chapter was giving such just great feedback. The people at events were giving great feedback. I mean, everybody loved it, right? You only hear the positive things.
Sure.
And eventually you hit this roadblock where, oh, wait a minute, I know how to build a product that serves this one merchant, but the space in general, this isn't really a negative thing, but it's really fragmented based on like everybody's unique, everybody's different. And a lot of what I learned with how you need something that's just flexible enough, but it does have enough rules as well to where you can kind of guide the merchant, but you're also flexible to where, all right, this can work for a coffee shop as well as an apparel store. And to be honest, we're still working on that with the new, branded company and the new products.
I love it.
I think we're going to get there and closer than people have before. But that's point of sale, right? There hasn't been a point of sale software that truly works for every merchant. And
there's never going to be one size fits all. I've in my research, I've been looking at this industry for 30 years. There's 70 primary categories, and us branching off that, there's probably just under 1,000 subcategories. The subcategories in and of themselves can be dramatically different because of the needs of merchants. And the problem is when you go to those merchants where people typically, a young startup founder who wants to get in POS, they'll stumble across a merchant using a Casio cash register and an old Verifone terminal. And they'll look at the inefficiencies, which is great. That's what us nerds do. We'll say, gosh, we can really change these things. And then you have this simple conversation. Well, Mr. Merchant, why didn't you get a POS system in 1970? They've been around since then. Have you ever tried it? And usually, a lot of these merchants have become so numb to these conversations, you never even get the real story. Fact is, they probably did try it. Fact is that they're not dumb. If they're in business for any period of time, they're the Darwinian example of success because they're competing sometimes in extremely competitive environments, right? So we run across this situation where people just assume that they're using crude tools, that there's got to be a reason why. And I think the problem is, and you've identified it, is not to just assume that you can just do one size fits all. And that's what I love about what you guys are doing is you're slowly looking at these categories. And frankly, it's kind of one of the reasons why some of the larger POS companies are doing okay. Well, no. Actually, one of the reasons why Square isn't doing so well is they have a one size fits all approach. It will prove to be the most ridiculous notion that the company has ever had. Probably, maybe the top 5. There's other ridiculous things, but
what I find so fascinating about the uniqueness of the point of sale market is that it really is so. It's so important that the product is brilliant because when you show it to a merchant, right, they're going to think in their own mind about how it affects their lives, right? That's the only thing that really matters. And whether you're Amazon or, Micros or a smaller company like Zing, they're still going to look at it and think the same things. Like when you go to Amazon, there's a sense of like, well, this is safer, and behind the scenes, I know they're going to do a lot more to, make sure my product gets in on time. And you think about all these things that a larger company has that is valuable to you. But as a merchant, it's really like, if you have the buttons and you have the features and support and everything they need, like I felt no resistance to go with a smaller company and no advantage to going with a larger one, almost sometimes a disadvantage in a sense.
Well, I think you have a feel as a merchant, and if you have somebody who's much closer to the founder and the programmers than some big, international, national company, you might feel that they're going to be more likely to adjust to your needs. And I think the biggest problem is it's so boring for some people to become an anthropologist, to go in there and actually look at the processes that a merchant is going through in their manual systems and to try to replicate that or to try to enhance that. And typically what happens is when you go into these environments, and I'm a researcher, I kind of love this whole process. So I like breaking down everything into the steps that a merchant takes. You can ask a merchant, how many steps do you have in your checkout procedure? Oh, 3. And when you actually look at it, no, it's about 45. And so the POS guy that's writing the software up in a cubicle somewhere never goes out in the real world to test it. He goes, oh, the merchant said, somebody comes back, merchant says he's got 3 or 4 processes while he does sales, and they kind of replicate to that. And it's amazing because, the dry cleaning industry versus a convenience store, right? I mean, somebody to try to sell a POS system to a dry cleaner. If you notice, most dry cleaners don't have POS systems. I'm giving them a bit of a pep talk here, right? Why is that? Well, it's because the processes that a dry cleaning business will have is extremely unique. And then it's unique within the processes that dry cleaner is using. For example, are they doing the service internally? Is it a 1-day service, 1-hour service? Are they shipping it out down the street for a laundry service to do it? So all of these things, well, what do you have there? Well, that's a scheduling system. That's no longer the primary premise of that POS system is to schedule 2 variable points. When does the customer need the product or service rendered, and when can they actually get it done within their internal process?
Yeah, like Nate hasn't been that. I always found that's such the tricky part is like, while the company kind of came on this need for Red Chapter, which is an apparel company, and it fit perfectly with that. It's like, Nate, like, how do you think about, which features to build? It's really it's a challenging product, because the product is so important. It's naturally very challenging. How do you think about like moving in different verticals now? Do you think about like just focusing hard on apparel or more just building it broad at this point? Or do you think about different verticals? Like that's such an interesting challenge.
Well, I think it's what Brian alluded to. You have to think about where the merchant sits inside a vertical or a micro vertical. And if you don't, you're going to build just this one piece of software that isn't great at anything for the merchants. And one reason why we did the rebrand of Zing and where we're kind of headed is in the past 2 years, there's a couple things. Like one thing you said about merchants care about a couple things. One could be the fact that they want it to look good. Like Zing does that. We rebuild everything to make it look modern and beautiful. But really, the brains behind it is what I'm most excited about, and that's the integration technology. So how I think the future is going to work with serving merchants, the point of sale needs to be flexible enough and have the data inside of it, know how to deal with the data points that most merchants have in their business. And from there, the flexibility comes from some bit of settings and flow setup, but it shouldn't be that complex. A lot of it comes from the integration tech. So for us, Zing has, it's 50% integration tech. We have spent so much time to make it. You click a button to connect your BigCommerce store. You have a fully replicated, mirror image of your store in less than 10 minutes. You don't do anything. And then when you update a product or add an order in Zing, it automatically affects your online store. And things like that typically were so complex that you had to have a team of engineers come in just to like design the solution before they even built it. And I think the future is where you look at, all right, there's other companies that Zing can connect to. And we know the point of sale. We know how intimate it is. We know how it affects the customer. We know what data points are there. And we have the integration tech to connect to other systems that are world-class in what they do. So that could be online ordering, e-com, shipping. You should be able to plug it in. You should have to buy everything and look for a point of sale that does it out of the box, because it's going to be a bad experience. But if you have a really good platform and you grow into these other platforms that do specifically the shipping and everything else, I think that's how you get a good experience that affects the maximum amount of merchants long term. So we're not quite there yet, but we're building that platform and we have a couple connections there already.
What drove you to the integration? Because that is dramatically different than about the top 20 POS payment startup companies, because they're adverse to doing this kind of stuff. What drew you in that direction?
So ZingCheckout, you hear every day as you're trying to grow it. You're like, oh, okay, you want this feature, you want this, you want exactly what you laid out. It's everyone has these, they don't even know what parts of the flow they're missing out on. They know they subconsciously they do it, but they only think they have 3 or 4. So they're looking for those 3 or 4 main, like key points. Now, what they really want is something far more sophisticated underneath it all. And we had this, about 2 years ago, where we're starting the online, the BigCommerce integration. And at first, what everybody wants to do is just connect it and just, all right, let's just connect it to where the stock updates. What we found is when we were doing research that No. Everybody, they don't want, it's not just update stock. They don't want to do things twice. They don't want to add a whole nother set of problems. And for that reason, most merchants don't have an online store, even in the apparel space, even though on from our research that they do on average about $6,000 more per month. Businesses that have an online store, you need it. You should just boot it up. You should grow your base. But they're not going to do it because the point of sale is so disconnected from that. So when we started hitting all these very similar points with merchants, then we're like, wait a minute, we have to step back here. If we really want to be a leader 5 years down the road, we have to spend the next 2 years building the technology to make it possible. We can't iterate on this like we did with ZingCheckout because it's such a complex piece of technology. So we really, while ZingCheckout was growing, we've been building this inside the company for the past 2 years, and we had to do it to get where we want to go.
This is interesting. So when you presented the idea, essentially this is an inventory management system, right? When you presented this idea to a merchant, they on the surface say, sure, why not, right? And the question is, we've had computers around for quite a long time, since the dawn of the internet. What has been the real stumbling block with technologists not being able to synchronize inventory between retail and online? What have you seen that's caused such a disconnect? Because even today, major retailers still have this problem.
No, I think what it is, everybody thinks about the problem from an engineer perspective. And, I'm an engineer at heart. And when I think of a problem, I get excited about just creating it, first of all. But since everybody you have all these, say you have Magento, you have BigCommerce, Shopify, all these big hosted or open source solutions, they actually, the way they treat their data is completely different. You can't write into BigCommerce and then do Shopify the next day, because you actually, they don't have some of them don't even have the required data. Like Shopify in particular, the way they manage SKUs is completely different than BigCommerce. And like things like required, like for us, we require SKUs, and we even jump ahead of that. And if you connect into BigCommerce that don't have them, we'll help you automatically generate them without doing anything, because we took the time to understand what is needed in inventory management. Now, the only reason we have this data to know what to do with is because we were a point of sale company for 2 years before we started the integration. Now, other people don't have that advantage. They start from scratch and they go, oh, this will be easy. I'll just connect these points. Well, guess what? You didn't factor in all the different use cases. So now you have an integration that will only ever do one thing for that specific use case. And it's so hard of a problem that, you have like Channel Advisor, public company. Sure. All they do is e-com integration. I think in the future, as a point of sale company, if you don't handle some part of the integration problem, you're going to become less and less important over time. You're going to have companies like us come on, and we're just going to automate it. We're going to do it better, and it's going to be built into the product.
Thing to find, quick side to this, are you integrating with Amazon's seller platform, or have you?
So we're not currently integrating, but we see a future where everything is connected. So just take it as that.
I got you. So my thing is, if in fact you have a synchronized inventory, right? And let's just say you have synchronized intelligence about pricing, because that's the other problem that merchants face is not only do they not necessarily know what they have on hand, because especially if it's a single operator, one location, maybe they have it instinctively. As soon as you, I've seen this 30 years, as soon as a merchant goes to two locations, the instinctive level drops by a magnitude. I've seen merchants who have never had anything written down instinctively know almost to within like a Rain Man accuracy. Like I know exactly how much is on that rack. I know exactly what my profits are, et cetera. You move to two locations, that radically breaks down. And in my view, there's very few things that can fill that gap for the small and medium-sized merchants of 3, 5, 10 locations, because keeping track of inventory, keeping track of pricing, competitive pricing, the whole supply chain, it is an enormous challenge. And look, we've had computers around since the PC, and I still see very few people attacking that problem. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, we have, once you start to automate, a lot of the processes, and especially via like an API, interesting things happen to where these business owners, what they want, a lot of them are getting savvy to the point where they understand API. And it's not because they're programmers. It's because they are so used to not being able to complete things that just the way they see in their head. When you give them API, they'll find a developer, they'll sketch out what they need, and they'll get it done. So we have people that, they'll come to us. I was using BigCommerce before I connected you to, and their API, I don't understand it. It doesn't map to what my business is. So, but our API, it'll actually automatically reach out to any integration and forward what you send it. So if you send it to email address, it'll update it to your email marketing. It'll update on your online store. It just does it automatically. So this guy switches to our API, and it's actually a faster, more complete experience from his brick and mortar mind than the BigCommerce API. So we're actually, part of that. And I think when you ask why it has been done before, you need to solve the problem. What does data look like when it's translated onto another business process and that no one's done that before. And a lot of things we run into that are the most difficult. There's nobody to help you. You have to talk to the merchant. You have to build it. We're in our third version of our integration layer. And what we feel is, we're pretty close to nailing almost every part of it, but that's a 2-year process. I mean, most of the time you get it done and it's terrible the first time, you just stop and they have to deal with it. So I think you're going to see more and more, you're going to see more and more companies like us release kind of a standardization APIs in a way, like where if you use their API, it knows enough about your data. It's intelligent enough just design wise to where you just write to that and it'll do the work for you. And I think that's where we want to move as an industry.
Yeah, and I think, and Nate, that's what really gives Zing the advantage over, like Micros and just PayPal and larger companies is that Square is that like particularly those guys their iteration cycles are not going to be as intense. They're more like, okay, well that's done. We can have our engineers think about other things. Whereas if your core, being is around making that better, you're just going to constantly think more about it, and you can feel it when you're working on it. Nate, last week we brought on Joaquin, the CEO of QuadPay.
Yeah.
And one of the really interesting things he said and talked about was through the evolution of QuadPay, they launched in Chile exclusively, and they would go down there, and while they're in Santa Monica, so they'd go down to Chile, relatively small market, and they would try to sell to all the merchants there, and they eventually now have a lot of traction. They pitched a Walmart, and that was a story in itself. And now they have a lot of traction with the gas stations down there. I think like 60% of gas stations use QuadPay in Chile. It was a really interesting story. And one of the things he said was going down there and saying, you're a California successful entrepreneur. Like, would you want to try my product? They're all flattered and they immediately jump on. And he said that gave him a big advantage, more so than any sort of Latin descent that they had because they came from Spain. And I remember when I was with you, Nate, that we'd get a lot of requests overseas. How do you consider international expansion? And maybe Faisal, you could touch on just what the world looks like from the point of sale perspective, not only in Pakistan, but from whatever else you see in the Middle East or Asia. And if you think there's opportunity for Nate to kind of spend more time, or just point of sale in general, spend more time. So Nate, do you think what kind of attention do you give internationally now, I should say, to wrap a long question?
Currently, there's users in over, I think, 126 countries on Zing. So, I mean, we're very aware that traffic can come from anywhere. And it's some of those countries only have one, of course, so it's not like all of them are huge. But having a conversation with a merchant where like they can't use Zing because their country blocked everyone from like the firewall just won't allow. I mean, weird things like that you see. It's very interesting what they have to deal with. And there's a lot of problems we can't overcome because we, from the US or from really anywhere outside the country, it's up to more of the government to allow us through. So when you talk about those problems, I mean, I still don't know what the best way to deal with that is. But I mean, most of the countries aren't like that, of course. But it's just one of those use cases.
I had two questions. A very tangential question: do you accept bitcoins for your subscription? And the second one is that you have an API system. Have you seen a market develop where people are coming up to you and saying, well, I would like to develop a plugin for your ZingCheckout, or I would like to develop a skinnable version for it, or something like that, where you have, just like FreshBooks has an entire ecosystem of developers and startups who've made application plugins for FreshBooks. Do you have something like that happening for ZingCheckout?
Yeah, so we do have developers that are currently using our API. So our API isn't public yet, but it is fully baked. So it's being used in both of our products. So yeah, we do have people building plugins. We actually have a lot of merchants that have used it well before any developers. We've had people using the API for up to a year that they just started asking, and we don't even really have full documentation at that point. But we're like, okay, you want it? Let's give it to you. And it's kind of one of the reasons why we're really proud of where the APIs ended up. Is we got a year of listening to merchants before any developer hit it. And then there was another question. What was the first question?
The Bitcoin.
The Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, Bitcoin. So we've actually had. And you said something about kind of white labeling in a way, or skinning. So yes, we don't have Bitcoin in now. We want to work on Bitcoin. Coinbase obviously makes an integration really easy. We've looked at that. We've actually had a lot of partners, like bigger partners in the industry that make hardware or other software that would like a Bitcoin integration. So it's becoming. I wouldn't say parody, but it's kind of the hip thing to do in a way. So from just like kind of a PR perspective, you might see us do it. I don't understand enough myself, and I don't think the merchants understand it enough for us to get a huge amount of play, at least in the US. I don't know if you're alluding to maybe internationally it's a lot more used.
Well, I mean, you said yourself you have clients from 126 countries, and a few countries are blocking it. Just like they're blocking it, there are very many countries from where you can't do credit card purchases if you want to do something, even if you wanted to buy something online. So Bitcoin is, one of the easy ways of doing it. So it may seem very trivial, or maybe a fashion-like statement in the US right now, but it certainly is catching up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I see somewhat of a trend. It's just in terms of what, from what merchants are asking for, we almost never get any merchants that ask for like anything Bitcoin related. They normally ask for more automation and more features, so like things that make their day-to-day life easier. So that's kind of just the data I had. That's what I see every day, and I'm not saying we want to wait until every single person wants it, but there has to be, in my mind, a little bit bigger opportunity there before we get off our chosen roadmap. So I don't know. I would be open to you guys maybe trying to push me one way or the other, because I want to learn more about it.
Yeah, Faisal, I'd be curious to hear, Faisal, what you think. If you were to give Nate some strategic advice on international thoughts.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was trying to, get some themes downloaded from a website, and went there, purchased it, gave my credit card information. They had Pakistan on the drop-down list, and then they said, this is an unsupported country. And being in the payments, I instantly knew what that meant, because whoever designed the submission form had just taken the country list from somewhere. But what they didn't know is that they were using PayPal's payment gateway, and PayPal's payment gateway doesn't support, I think, something like maybe 37 or 38 countries, and Pakistan was one of them. Couldn't purchase the theme. But lo and behold, the guy accepted Bitcoin, and boom, sent him one, the amount that was that I had to send, very small amount, and I bought the theme. So that was a classical case. For example, WordPress.com. If you want to take WordPress.com hosting, they use the PayPal payment gateway. Again, 37 countries are left out. But now that they've started, I don't know if they started accepting Bitcoin directly, but I think they do it through some other means. So that's a really great way of getting, paying for it. It may not, it's catching up, I mean, it's not that it's not catching up. Just very recently, Dubai had its first Bitcoin exchange open up. So that's a big thing, opening a Bitcoin exchange in the Middle East, which is a very controlled market. So I think it'll eventually catch up.
And Nate, do you see any of the Do you see a large number of customers coming from specific countries? Like, do you see a need in Egypt?
Well, in terms of, I mean, the main countries other than the U.S. are definitely Australia. It's right number 2 for us. Australia, they kind of understand the cloud. They'll go to cloud services first almost. Nowadays, like companies like Xero, which have made it popular there. That, and then the UK, of course, is both countries that we can kind of serve without much modification. Now, those are, other than that, every country is maybe some have up to 50, but most of them don't. They're not in the hundreds of users. So we kind of focus on the UK and Australia beyond the US at this point. I mean, I think in general, like we're getting a lot more China users from China that are just attempting to try it out. I don't think that we fit for them yet, but you can see this.
Do you mean hackers?
Not hackers. No, I mean just in terms of in general, it seems people are willing to use US-based software more, where years ago, no one, I couldn't see anybody using, like, basing their business off of, an Austin, Texas-based business when they're in China. But we're getting partnerships and other things coming in that are like, hey, can you do China Pay or things like that? So, or Union Pay. So a lot of, I think a lot for us, I mean, international growth is going to kick in, pretty soon. We have a couple features that are going to make it flexible enough to pretty much work with any currency. And I think those are things you have to do first. You have to nail a lot of that before you go into those territories.
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
Nate, shifting gears here. What's your insight on why Intuit and QuickBooks POS has met the lackluster success? I mean, we all know that QuickBooks is the accounting system of small and medium-sized business. And why have they not been able to translate that into a POS product? And how has that informed your product?
Yeah, I mean, most of what I hear about QuickBooks Point of Sale are users that come over and are frustrated that it does a lot. It's almost like their roadmap for a product was, let's just put as many features as possible in a drop-down.
Kitchen sink.
Yeah, the kitchen sink. And a lot of businesses, because it has the QuickBooks name, they'll use it. But I know there's just the user experience they kind of missed. I mean, you look at like how to return an item. It's kind of talked about earlier about you have to have a little bit of rules in place to guide the merchant. They have 3 or 4 different ways you can return an item. I think you want it to be so that they went so flexible and so feature laden that it doesn't make any sense. Like when you're training your employees, oh, you could return by making the item negative or like doing a discount or, bringing up this return like modal and doing it that way or creating a new ticket. It's just like, really, like, just give me one way that's quick and easy to do it. So I think they have that throughout the whole software from what I've heard.
So why do you think it's so hard for a company like Intuit, who has a lot of engineers and a lot of access to data? Why is it so hard for them to see what is so obvious to all of us here and probably everybody listening, anybody who's used the software?
Well, I think all of us here and anybody listening is really passionate about not only building things, but it has to be a real solution for that given consumer. Like, for me, before I even had this point of sale company, Zing, it was I've been helping merchants for a decade. I really love doing that. You have to really have a passion for it because a lot of it isn't the most exciting thing in the world. Like, you have to get beyond how just a lot of it's it's been done before, right? A point of sale has been built before, and e-com has been built before. And why do companies keep coming out? Well, if you have the passion for it, you can research enough and care about their problems enough to make it incrementally better every single day. And I don't think Intuit's doing that. I think that they try, but you can't just throw engineering hours at something. It's not that type of problem. And
what do you see as the back end? Now, whenever I see a merchant, almost always ask them what accounting software are you using, because I'm a nerd that way. And inevitably, it is QuickBooks.
Yeah.
What do you think that means as far as moving forward with integration? I mean, all of these things are sort of desperate pieces, right? You have companies like Square who unfortunately integrated with QuickBooks in the entirely wrong way because they're a competitor, right? So QuickBooks is now taking data from Square merchants saying, oh, here's a good one. We'll market to them with a banner. But it's sort of like you have to integrate with QuickBooks, but then again, is that a good thing or a bad thing for a POS company?
So for us, it's a good thing. So we have a QuickBooks Online integration coming out, and it'll be the easiest way to integrate the QuickBooks Online via a point of sale. So just like a big commerce, you press a button, you forget about it. It just does it for you. I think unless you have a really good integration layer beneath your point of sale, it's difficult. A lot of importing and exporting, and I guess the accountants really like it. A lot of accountants, they don't want to be online. They don't want to automate anything. They want you have to put this little program on your PC so we can download into our cloud, and then we can go into well, of course, because you're going to spend 20 hours on that, where Zing will do it in 5 seconds a day, and you don't have to do anything. I don't know for the current players like Square you bring up. I don't know if it's terrible they integrate. I think it was a reaction. They kind of made, they're like, oh no, we need to be seen as more than just like only working with Square. I feel they should have made the open decisions they're making now. They should have made that 2 years ago.
Exactly. Well, my point is this, if you're going to be creating an API relationship, which Square made it impossible for anybody to integrate with them. And then when they finally did API, they did, FreshBooks and this with Intuit. The way it was done, in fact, I think was not from a strategic level as far as competition, a good idea. I mean, by the time they wind up doing this integration, you now have a company who is competing with Square pretty vigorously to try to convert, tablet-based merchants into traditional merchants. And I just think strategically that was a very bad idea, and primarily because there is not enough flexibility within their product. So let's just say they had a complete or more robust POS system more in line with what you're doing. Then there's a lot less likelihood that a merchant would be liberated. But when you have a limited POS system that at the time didn't even have inventory on hand, they didn't have an inventory on hand system. I mean, and the one that they have now is not exactly full featured. It's sort of an afterthought. That actually created a migration point for people out of the product. I'm more speaking from an executive level and a strategic level, not a technology level. And I knew that before, and I actually checked it in research, and I found a lot of merchants were being looted over from Square's limited POS system to, unfortunately, QuickBooks POS. And it's the most bizarre thing in my mind, but it's because of the use cases that they had. So there's something to be learned there. As far as having open APIs, I think if you're going to create any product for a merchant, it needs to have APIs day one as early as possible, because you want to invite as many people into the ecosystem as possible. And you also want to integrate into all the desperate different products that are out there. My view is at some point there's going to be a Rosetta Stone. There's going to be, and it could be you, Nate, somebody sitting in the middle and saying, I'm not here to try to change the world. I'm not here to try to touch every payment in the world. I'm here to try to make everything that already is working work better. This idea that you need to take all of the country roads and all the paths and all the highways and eradicate them when you put in a freeway system is ridiculousness. Nature doesn't do that. People don't do that. And startups cannot do that. You can't change those processes. So I love this premise of integration and working with things that are working and hopefully maybe migrating merchants out. There's a safety and comfort thing that Mike always talks about, and that is, this is the heart and lifeblood of a merchant. I mean, and when you go out there, and I'm sure you've sold your product yourself, what are those feedback systems that are coming from merchants? What are their fears when you first start talking to them about this?
Well, what's really great now is that some of the decisions we made, I'm hearing more and more, especially in the integration, focus. So, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, a lot of it was just, I want to make sure that I can get these reports, these, very, very parity features. Like, can I connect this merchant account? All that. Now it's kind of gotten beyond to where there's a lot of services that they're either offered from their bank or from like Square, or just at a base level point of sale that they can accept credit cards and they can do all that. So they're not as scared about like the reporting and the credit cards. But we're hearing more and more, I want to spend less time doing A, B, or C. And a lot of that in our mind is integration. So we hear things like, I'm on QuickBooks. I want to keep using QuickBooks because my accountant has it, but I don't want to use their point of sale, or I don't want, or what they have these needs. And when we can say, oh, we actually have a QuickBooks Online integration coming, and it just, you press a button and it does it for you. I see more and more of those wants of why can't I just have this happen almost for free? Like, why can't I have an online store
exactly
for no time? And it was a bet to spend so much time on the integration layer, but it feels really good to hear, wow, we can solve this. The past 5 things you just told me, 4 of them are integration problems. And the 5th, we don't integrate with that, but you can use our API. You don't have to build a software that does everything if it can connect to everything.
Yeah.
Nate, I love that philosophy.
One of the interesting stories Nate and I had together, and it kind of touches on your philosophy of like, I think that the approach for finding a point of sale is drastically changed and is still changing from old school. And Brian, you would probably know more about this growing up with, like, you're selling merchant account payment processing to a merchant, and then you're going to wrap it in a point of sale or also sell them a point of sale, because really, like, Google wasn't around. It wasn't easy. Like Nate mentioned, you searched and tried out, 7, 8 different point of sale solutions. Now it's really, really easy to go on a site, just look at what the company offers, maybe just click a demo. Like Zing makes it really easy. Just click it, sign up, you're automatically in. In 30 minutes, a merchant can sell himself. Like one of the stories we had, Nate and I together, and this is kind of more experimental. It shows you what we did, was Nate and I together, we went down to, where was it, like Laguna Beach, and we were like, well, we have to go sell direct. And I remember we went down there, and it just, we talked to all these businesses. We went in and just spoke with them, and they're like, they weren't looking for a point of sale at that moment, and it was next to impossible to shove it down their throat. And I think when a merchant looks, when they're in a need, period, so they have like 2 weeks where something's changing, they're going to a new store, they're opening, they're closing, they're doing something, they hit some critical mass of revenue where it's like too stressful, they'll go on and they'll just search, and they'll just go down the list of point of sales. They'll ask their friend, they'll try it out, they'll give it a couple of days, and then they'll just go with the one that works the best. So that kind of change in the distribution, I think, is a really massive, important shift in how merchants find, like how companies grow, how merchants find point of sale. And I'm sure, Nate, you felt it in the last year, especially.
Yeah, I mean, one thing though is that, and anybody listening to that, it's kind of maybe a little bit earlier than where I am. Something that I've learned the hard way, and just as a company, you can't remove people 100% from the equation. And Square gets a lot of flack from this, from like, I can't call a number. When you're as important as a point of sale, you do need to have people there that want to help the merchant on the phone, or via chat or email or whatnot. Like, you have to have a pretty responsive team there. At one point I was like, oh, we'll just go to the engineering team and we'll just build great product and integration. All of this would be solved. But
there would never be a problem. You don't need a customer service number if it's made so well. And it's funny you bring this up, because I had to sit down with, let's just call them some executives at Square in the early days. And they asked me, and I didn't talk about this a lot over the years, because I knew their business model didn't allow for it. And it's not my job to knock them in the kneecaps, But, the very first thing I said to them is, I want to go to your website in a dream and see in the upper right-hand corner a toll-free number. And until you do that, your product will be substantially less valuable to the world. And the engineer staff looked at me like I was out to Mars. There was 2 people in that meeting that knew exactly what I was talking about, and they were overruled. The founder had this belief system and presented it, that if you make a product so good, it doesn't need technical support. And I said, If that in fact is the case, what is the most beautiful computer you've ever used? What's the most beautiful device you've ever used? iPad. I go, then why do I walk into an Apple store and the very back of that store is Apple geniuses? Why did Apple do that? Why do they take the most expensive real estate? Because they have the most valuable real estate in the world. Every square inch sells more than even Tiffany's by a magnitude of 3. Why would they take up all that retail space?
People are just going to buy it online, you know?
Yeah, everybody
like,
just buys online. No. The world, see, this is the problem us nerds do. The world is self-service. Oh, well, hold it. Who's your leader? Who's the genius nerd of all of us? Well, most of us, it's Steve Jobs and Apple. Then why did Steve open up so many retail stores? Quagmire there. Can't equate it. Everybody's going to buy online, right? The next thing is, if a product is so brilliantly designed, why did Steve go and install the Genius Bar? And why is it used so often? You go to any Apple store and you ask how valuable this is. They will tell you that if they did not have a Genius Bar, they would probably, most store managers will know this off the top of their head, they would have 60 to 80% less sales at their store.
Yeah, because where would my grandma go to take classes?
That's right. Where did my kids go for summer camp? They brilliantly use the Apple Store in ways that most of us technologists don't know. Well, okay, so people buy this invalid meme, and it's recycled by the investor community. Unfortunately, even at Sand Hill Road, and some notable investors will instruct founders and through their VC channels and directly that you need to build a self-sufficient product that doesn't require people. And if you need people the day one to do sales and to do support, you failed as an entrepreneur. This meme will be proven to be the most fatal meme that this last series of epoch of startups have bought into. Because if you're selling business to business, customer service is critical. It has to be built in unison with technologists. And I will assert that sales also needs to be built as a trifold mechanism: customer service, engineering, and sales. And they must all be well-loved and equally valuable in that company. And if there's an imbalance between any of these systems, the company will ultimately fail or fail to achieve the greatness they could have had. But today, because social networks have risen to the prominence, and those multiples have done so well for some investors, they use this social network model to inform business-to-business startups and say, I'm not going to invest money in your startup because you're too old-fashioned. You're using people. And the thing is, this is what I say to almost anybody. It's one thing to have a POS company that may not want to have any technical support. It's an entirely different thing when a bank or a financial institution or a financial service doesn't have a phone number. And I sat in with a meeting of VCs a couple of months ago. This is how recent. It's been going on for years. And I said, if you woke up one morning and you expected $10,000 in your bank account from your business and there was zero, are you going to tweet? Are you going to email? Are you going to visit a webpage, a how-to, as good as it might be done, a Q&A? Or are you going to call the bank up? And you better have a 24-hour number, because you're up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're looking at this, there's no money, you're going to get on the phone. And you pretty much want them to have an American accent, and you want them to be in the United States, and you want them to say, yes, sir, we're going to fix this. And this is the problem. Now, here's the problem. Ultimately, it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of time. Who wants to manage a phone operation? Very few people wake up as entrepreneurs and say, I can't wait until I build a phone room with, telemarketing staff. Nobody does. But the thing is, it's ex post facto, and then you're chasing after the problem years later. Square will one day have to put a number in the upper right-hand corner. They're going to have to. They don't have it today. They'll sort of facetiously tell you, oh, we have a contact number. It's when you log into our register, it's somewhere in the bottom. Amazon saw this. Amazon, if you got the Amazon register, local register, and you open up the trifold, it doesn't say have a question, call us. In big 12-point type, call us, and here's our toll-free number. And, that's Amazon, and they've already built that infrastructure. But Square will have to do this because the merchant community ultimately will demand it. They will shame them into doing it. My thing is, get in front of it, do it to begin with, manage it. And if you can get that part of your business managed, the other aspects of profitability will fall into line. If you can't manage profitability or you need to scale to make it work, then maybe there is something wrong with the product. But I know this. I don't care how well engineered a POS product is. The people who are using it, and I'm sure Nate and Mike, you know this, are not technologists. And a lot of times they're not the owner. The person that you have to convince most aggressively in some businesses are the employees. And sometimes they come down to part-time employees who have less than a desire to love the beauty of what you built and more of a desire to get out and have a date tonight. Do you see my point?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And when selling this, how often do you feel that employees either enforce or de-enforce the idea of having a POS system?
What do you mean from a?
Well, when you're out there convincing an owner, right? An owner might say, hey, this is a great idea. But do you ever see employees jumping in and say, hey, boss, I'm not going to do that? Or, hey, boss, that's a great idea.
I think employees, a lot of that, more and more I'm seeing, they drive a lot of the decisions because
I love it.
they're using it every day. But I mean, we have people that a lot of business where we hear more from the employees than we do the owner because they just strike a rapport with some of the support team, and they're just going to email about anything they have, like whether it's a feature or this could be done better. And those are the businesses that typically stay the longest. They're the most happy. Even if we don't have a feature, they're happier because we're least listening.
Yeah.
And that's what they want to hear. And that's hard to do at when you say scale. I totally understand where Square comes from in that. When they're when you have 2 million businesses and a lot of them charge under $100 a month, you can't. They're making almost nothing off that. If anything, losing money on that merchant. So I get it from their model, but it's like you said, they chose that model to begin with.
It's a quagmire they created, right? Yeah. So my thing is, the logical thing is to face reality. I mean, I'm one of these people that, history informs me, empirical praxis, you study this stuff. And you go, there's going to be a day of reckoning. So sooner or later, face this and integrate it into your system so that you don't have to ex post facto chase after it. There are ways to support small merchants, and it's not by ignoring them and throwing.
Well, I think something really. I mean, if I could give like anybody from Square listening, I mean, if they have an open API right now, and they're kind of working with it. They're still developing it. If you say, and if we integrated Square and like allowed merchants to use, the same thing we do BigCommerce, you could do a Square Market. That's
sure.
Totally possible. We could do that. And I don't mind doing that. The thing is that if a Square merchant comes to us, we'll help them as if they're our merchant, if we're a good partner. So if they were really open to a great open API and partner ecosystem, they could get other people to provide that support for them. In a way, they just have a better experience. It seems like they're leaving out that aspect to where they're just closed enough. They're open a little bit. They're still closed enough to where it's kind of hard to be a partner with them. It's like I've emailed Square. I've tried to get.
It's like the culture is closed, right?
The culture is still closed. It's still we can do everything better than everyone else, and we're going to solve every problem.
Yeah, and the reality is there is sort of a mixed signal on what the purpose of market was. And I know some of the inside baseball on that, and unfortunately it's translated out to the creative world. But, if you're going to create an online market and you want this merchant to really be successful in an online market, you do make APIs, you do make it easier to communicate, and you make it so that guys like yourself, Nate, can support their efforts. I mean, being insular and arrogant, you're actually forcing away countless opportunities. And,
Nate,
it's confusing to me.
Nate, I'm curious, do you think that point of sale in general will eventually become a loss leader to the effect that, some of the more aggressive startups like, I'd say just the category of like couponing and things kind of additional to managing the business solutions, do you think point of sale eventually drops to $0? It's sort of a loss leader. Businesses use it, but then on top of that, they buy things. It's almost the freemium model where they'll purchase the couponing or the text receipts, or maybe there's like a loyalty platform wrapped involved. Do you think it moves in that direction? Maybe Zing, maybe just the industry in general.
I don't think it's a loss leader from like what market we're targeting like just mid-tier or like, people growing to that or coming down into something that's like enterprise, but they want it to be more accessible. I mean, it's already kind of a loss leader at the micro merchant level, and that's, but that's shown to be not a good business model. So if you add something that's mission critical in any industry, you should charge for it, and you should make enough to where you can actually help them when they need help. And so I think if you become a loss leader across the whole market, I mean, something complicated like micros, how do you become a loss leader? You need a person there to come out and help you because it's so complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
Payments are never going to, I mean, if anything, the payments are becoming a loss leader for other services. Yeah. It seems like, for at least from the Square perspective, they seem to be trying to build an ecosystem around that, and that's what it's going to end up being. Is okay, we'll give you. We want to be competitive on rates. Come in here. You need a better rate. Okay, here it is. Just please pay for our feedback and our booking system or whatever else we want to build on top.
Yeah, I think if merchants are wise enough to know, and I'll tell you, if you look at what merchants are actually paying for, they're not as cheap as most of the technologists of the world believe that they are, nor are they as to believe that they can really get some as a group. And I think you make such a valid point. If in fact a point of sale system is the heart and brain of a business once they're relied upon, why would you trust it to a company that is going to give it to you for free in hopes to make some revenue somewhere else, knowing that this merchant has been highly optimized to be a competitor in his own marketplace? And here's the problem I tell everybody who has a free model. When you go to a merchant and you tell him that you have a free model, ask that merchant deep in his heart what he feels about a free model. Here's what he's going to tell you. I don't give anything away for free. I don't even want to have a loss leader. I want to be able to make a reasonable markup, hopefully a keystone markup on my products. And so here's the problem. And I sit in merchants all the time. For 30 years, I'd go out and take 1 month off and just live inside these merchants. I'll do free work. I'll cut onions. I'll answer phones and stuff like that. And, usually if they pay me, I donate the money. I'll sit there and I'll listen to these free pitches come in. And I didn't need to be there to do that because I see it all the time. But just sitting there and hearing the feedback from merchants, it's mind-blowing. I'll tell you one, this last summer, here's the one I loved. A new startup who has sort of a combination of a Square and Groupon model put together, maybe a little Foursquare. Maybe some of those companies are involved. At the bottom line, he said to the merchant, he goes, you don't need to pay for anything. We're going to give you this, 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 and that. Merchants is hanging there. And the inevitable question came, is why are you giving this for free? Oh, because we want to build your business. And the merchant hung up the phone on the guy almost immediately. He turned to me, he goes, this guy was the most amateur salesperson I ever ran across. And I said, well, what finally did you in? He goes, I work here day and night and my profits are, X percent. And this guy is telling me somehow his business is going to operate just by giving me everything for nothing. And they don't have any kind of return. He said, I knew that if that's how he's going to treat me, that with that lie, there's no reason to go on, Yeah. And so, the merchant already knows this. They're not dumb. They're in a world of profit and markup.
It's like the reputation they have with the company matters so much. Even just the type of personalities online. Nate, it was really a pleasure having you on, man. It was great to hear the story.
Absolutely, yeah.
Zing is like a rocket. I just am really proud and excited about the stuff you're doing.
I'm very impressed with you.
We just need to know when the IPO is happening,
Yeah, of course.
Give us rights. Nate, any closing remarks, any thoughts you'd have or give to the audience of?
Well, one thing that Brian was just talking about, I think is really interesting is I think there's a general, when you're especially a SaaS startup or you want to hit scale, right? Everybody's talking about hit scale and do that. Well, there's this fear that the market is like this. You already know how big the market is. The market is ever expanding, and to think what these companies are doing, and I hope we get less and less companies doing this, where you're a loss leader, you give everything away for free, and really that's a market share grab. And it saddens me when I see that, because you won't stick around long enough to help anybody. And as an industry, we need to look at, okay, how do we truly help people and make their lives easier, make them more profitable? And if we focus on that, and the VC stop giving money to like, hey, let's grow really fast, and then you're bought by this company. Well, you didn't help anybody. And I just, anybody listening that is, in maybe fundraising mode, they're raising their seed round. It's like, oh, we should raise $2 million and just give away everything. And then we can raise an A, and then we can keep giving it, and we just keep growing that way. It's like, just try to think about what you're truly doing to the people you're attempting to help.
Yeah,
I love that.
I think dollars represent value. People will just use anything for free, but when you pay for it, you value it.
Well, and I would add that these merchants are our lifeblood, that we go to them. They support us. They're not the large national merchants. Please don't treat them like lab rats. Please don't come up with your latest experiment and potentially put them out of business, because I've seen that happen. So certainly Groupon is a good, most recent example of how merchants can be brought under. And this is not a good thing. So take a step back. If it's not just economics and psychological, try to find some moral ground on this. Yeah.
Awesome, Nate. Really appreciate it again. And until next time, guys.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.